A House of Horrors. Unraveling the Dark Secrets, 2025 British crime documentary. It was a house of horrors. The first time they entered, it seemed ordinary enough. Old, dusty, forgotten, but something was off. The air felt heavy, thick, like it was holding its breath. The walls whispered, though no one spoke. Jane had always been curious, always eager to explore the unknown. But this house, it made her skin crawl. The door creaked behind her. She couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else. The hallway stretched ahead, long and narrow. The floorboards groaned underfoot, as if protesting every step. Her flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows. There was a room at the end. A door cracked open. A glimpse of something that wasn't quite right. The air turned colder the closer she got. Her breath came out in small, nervous clouds. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers trembling. It felt too warm, too alive. A sudden sound echoed from within, footsteps. She froze. The room was dim, but her eyes could make out shapes. Faded wallpaper peeling from the walls. A shattered mirror reflecting fragments of herself. And then the smell. Rotting wood, mildew, and something worse. A creaking came from the corner. Her flashlight darted toward it. Nothing. The silence screamed louder. She stepped back, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. The door slammed shut behind her. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no movement, just the silence. But there was something in the air, something watching. She could feel it. A presence. Her heart raced. She didn't want to go any deeper, but something pulled her. Something wanted her to stay. The temperature dropped further. Her teeth began to chatter. Her eyes scanned the dark corners, the half-light revealing nothing but shadows. Yet, she could hear breathing. Slow, steady, not hers. It was coming from the ceiling. Above her. She looked up. Nothing. But the feeling was there. Close. The flashlight flickered again, and the shadows seemed to move. Was she imagining it? No. The breathing grew louder, closer, and then a whisper. Leave now. It was soft, barely a breath, but it was clear. Her hand was frozen on the flashlight. A sudden crash. She jumped, spinning toward the noise. The air seemed to press against her. Thick. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, thin, pale. Its face was not a face at all, just a hollow gaping void. And then the lights went out. The scream was hers. The darkness swallowed her whole. Her breath was shallow. Panic clawed at her throat. She fumbled with the flashlight, heart pounding in her chest. Nothing. The coldness around her deepened, suffocating. She tried to move, but her legs felt heavy, like they were stuck in thick mud. The floor beneath her creaked, as if it were alive, shifting with every step. She forced herself to take a breath. A ragged gasp. Her fingers brushed against the wall, feeling for an escape. There was a strange, damp texture. It wasn't wood. It felt like flesh. Her stomach lurched. The whisper came again. Closer now. Leave now. She turned her head, heart hammering in her chest. There, in the corner, a shadow, moving, watching. Her throat went dry. It wasn't just one shadow anymore. There were several, crawling from the floor, the walls. They were alive. She stumbled backward, tripping over something cold and brittle. A bone. The walls were pulsing now. A low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. She gasped in horror as the shadows shifted, twisting into shapes she couldn't comprehend. Shapes that didn't belong to the world she knew. A figure stepped forward from the darkness. A woman, or it used to be a woman. Her skin was stretched too tight, pale and lifeless, eyes black as night. She spoke again. her voice a low, guttural rasp. You shouldn't have come. Jane's heart froze. She turned to run, but the door was no longer there. The hallway stretched endlessly, mocking her, bending in impossible angles. Everything around her seemed to melt, warp, contort. The shadows now had faces, twisted, distorted faces, grinning at her. Help me, she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the thick, suffocating darkness. Her legs gave way. She crumpled to the floor, her back pressed against something soft, too soft. Her hand reached out, instinctively. It was flesh, warm, damp, and moving. A hand, cold, soft. It grabbed hers. The grip tightened. You're too late, the voice hissed. Her vision blurred. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She struggled, but something was holding her. Something alive. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her. A face. Her own. Twisted. Dead. The darkness closed in, suffocating her thoughts, her breath. Her own twisted face stared back at her from the void. Her eyes widened in terror. Was it her? Or something else? The grip on her hand tightened, pulling her deeper into the unseen. Cold fingers wrapped around her wrist, squeezing with a force that made her bones crack. She gasped, the sharp pain shooting through her arm. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her body jerked violently, as if something had taken control of her every movement. The shadows pressed in from all sides. They were no longer just shadows. They were beings. Their eyes glowed in the dark, burning, hungry. Their mouths stretched wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Help me, she whispered again, but this time, her voice was not her own. It sounded distant, hollow. The hand that held hers felt warm, sticky now. A wetness, spreading up her arm. Her chest tightened. She could barely breathe. The world around her twisted again. The walls caved in, pulsing with life. She tried to pull away, but her hand was trapped in the grip of whatever it was, whatever it had become. There was a low, rumbling growl, like the sound of something awakening from a long slumber. A voice, deep and rasping, echoed in her mind. Asterisk, it's too late for you. Too late for all of you. Asterisk. The floor beneath her shifted, groaning. She struggled, but the weight of it all was too much. She was sinking into something alive. Her fingers slid down the damp surface of the wall, desperately seeking any escape. But the house was not letting her go. The shadows pressed closer, crawling, choking the very air around her. Her head spun. There was something else now. A presence. Heavy. Overbearing. She felt it, watching. Her pulse quickened. She turned to face it. But all she saw was an endless expanse of darkness. The hand around hers pulled her forward. She had no choice but to follow. Through the shifting shadows, she glimpsed something. A figure. Tall. Thin. A silhouette against the blackness. The figure stepped closer, its face now visible. A smile stretched across its pale, lifeless face. It wasn't human. It was something far worse. Her throat tightened as it spoke. Welcome to the real nightmare. Suddenly, her body jerked. She gasped, eyes wide with horror. The air around her began to burn. A heat she couldn't explain. Asterisk, was she dying? Asterisk. She tried to move, to scream, but her body was frozen. The walls were closing in now. She couldn't breathe. No air. No way out. The last thing she felt before the darkness consumed her completely. The cold fingers on her skin. The last whisper in her ear. Now, you're one of us. The cold fingers tightened and then nothing. Silence. No breath. No heartbeat. No sound. Just the heavy, suffocating blackness. She couldn't feel her limbs anymore. Her chest was frozen, unmoving. Her mind screamed, but her body was gone. For a moment, she thought she had escaped, somehow, miraculously. But then, something inside her shifted. A deep, bone-rattling shift. A pressure in her chest, like something was crawling beneath her skin. It started slowly, a tiny tremor, then grew. A pulse. Not hers, but something else. She felt it. A warmth spreading through her. A liquid fire rushing to her limbs. But the warmth didn't feel right. It was wrong. It was alive. Her fingers twitched. Then, her hands clenched into fists. A violent, gut-wrenching pull. She gasped. She could breathe again, star. But it wasn't air that filled her lungs. It was something darker, heavier. The darkness had entered her, consumed her. Her eyes snapped open. But the world was no longer the same. The house was her now. The walls were no longer just walls. They were pulsing, breathing, like the inside of a living creature. Her vision blurred, flickered. Her body felt heavy, foreign. She struggled to sit up, her movements stiff and unnatural. A cold shiver ran down her spine as her eyes locked onto the reflection in the shattered mirror before her. It wasn't her face anymore. Not the face she knew. Her skin was ashen, her eyes black, empty, a hollow shell, a whisper in her mind. Welcome home. She screamed, but no sound came. Her mouth was open, but it was like the sound was trapped inside her throat. She tried to move, but the house responded. The walls shifted. The floor groaned beneath her as the shadows around her stretched and twisted. They were alive. She wasn't alone anymore. They were watching, waiting. The once familiar space was now a nightmare. A labyrinth of endless corridors, each one darker than the last. The ceiling stretched high above her, but she could no longer see where it ended. She could feel their eyes on her. They were all there watching. They whispered to her, their voices cold and jagged. We're waiting for you. Join us. Her body trembled, but it was no longer under her control. It was moving on its own, towards them. The shadows surrounded her, pulling her in. Every step she took felt like an eternity. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer Jane. She was one of them. Her body moved like a marionette, the house controlling her every motion. The darkness pressed closer, enveloping her until all that was left was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the walls. You belong to us now. And then there was no more Jane. There was only the house, the darkness, and the unholy whisper of those who had come before her, and those who would come after. For the house never let go. The house never let go. It was alive, hungry. It whispered in the silence, breathing with every movement, every twist of its crumbling walls. Jane, no, whatever she had become, could feel its pulse beneath her feet. Every room, every hallway, a living thing, and she was a part of it now. She moved through the house, like a shadow, her steps unsteady, but driven by something deeper. A force, an urge. The walls seemed to respond to her every thought, every fleeting desire. They welcomed her. She could feel them shifting, breathing around her. The darkness had swallowed her soul, and now it wanted more. She passed through the rooms that had once terrified her, but they no longer held any fear. The peeling wallpaper, the broken furniture, the faded photographs that lined the walls. None of it was real anymore. It was all just skin, a shell. She turned a corner, the sound of her feet slapping against the floor echoing in the silence. Something was waiting for her. A door, closed. The shadows pressed against it, eager. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing the cool, wooden surface. Knock. The sound came from the other side. Knock. Knock asterisk. Someone or something was on the other side, waiting. Her hand trembled, but she couldn't stop herself. The knob turned with a soft click. She pushed the door open. A gust of cold air hit her face. And there, in the center of the room, a mirror. It was huge, framed in gold, shimmering with a dull, sickly glow. It was alive. She knew it, even before she saw what was inside. A reflection. Her reflection. But it wasn't her. Not anymore. The face staring back at her was pale, cracked, hollow. Asterisk no. Asterisk. Her chest tightened. She stepped closer, drawn in, her hand reaching forward before she could stop it. The mirror seemed to shimmer, as if the reflection was moving. No, not moving. It was alive. The eyes in the mirror blinked. Slowly. Her eyes. They were dark, empty, hollow. She was looking back at herself, and then a smile, a grin that spread unnaturally wide across the reflection's face. It wasn't her smile. It wasn't her. Something else was in the glass. Asterisk, you've become one of us. Asterisk. The voice was her own but distant, twisted. Her reflection leaned closer, the smile widening. And then the figure in the mirror stepped out. It wasn't a mirror anymore. It was a doorway, a portal. The figure, a twisted version of herself, reached out. The moment their hands touched, the room seemed to shudder. The walls, the floor, the very air screamed. And then, asterisk nothing star. The room was empty. The mirror was cracked, shattered. There was no trace of Jane, no trace of the figure, no trace of the house, except for the faintest whisper that lingered in the air. Asterisk, now you're part of the story. Asterisk. And somewhere, deep in the house, the walls began to breathe again. The house was waiting for the next to come, to join. The house waited in silence. It was patient. It always was. The dust in the air seemed to move with an unseen force. A ripple, a tremor beneath the floor. The walls exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if they too were breathing in the last remnants of what had been. The darkness never left, and neither did the whispers. They echoed faintly through the empty rooms, sliding through cracks and under doors, carried on the wind. Asterisk, who's next? Asterisk. The house didn't know yet. It had to wait. It was always patient. But it knew. It always knew. The front door creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, hesitating at the threshold. Samantha. She was curious, just like Jane had been, just like so many before her. She stepped inside, her boots making soft, cautious thuds on the creaking wood. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, rot, and something foul. Something unnatural. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the house stirred. The air shifted. It recognized her. But Samantha wasn't aware of it. She wasn't looking for anything dark. She was just searching for a story, for a mystery, for the truth. And the house knew that it could use her, too. Her flashlight swept the hallway, casting brief shadows that seemed to stretch just a little too far. The floors groaned beneath her. Kriwak. Her breath caught. Samantha felt it before she saw it, the temperature dropping, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the hallway. Nothing, but then a flicker of movement, out of the corner of her eye. She whipped around. The hallway was empty. Her pulse quickened. Something was watching her, but she couldn't see what. She shook her head, pushing the unease down. It was just the house settling. It had to be. Samantha took a step forward, pulling out her phone. She clicked the screen, the faint glow illuminating the dust particles swirling around her. She didn't notice the door to the left, cracked slightly open. The whisper came again, louder this time. Asterisk, come closer. Asterisk. She stopped in her tracks. Her heart hammered in her chest. The sound was impossible to ignore. It was all around her now. It was as if the house itself was speaking to her. Something inside her twisted, a cold, clawing feeling at the pit of her stomach. She glanced to the side. The door was open, and behind it, a dark, suffocating void. She should leave. She should leave now. But something held her there. A force, an invisible thread that pulled her closer to the door. Her hand trembled as she reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the handle, the house exhaled, and then a shadow detached itself from the darkness inside. It was fast, unseen until it moved. It was right behind her, a cold, wet breath on the back of her neck. Her heart stopped. The whisper again. Asterisk, join us. Asterisk. A scream built in her chest. But before she could turn, the door slammed shut. Samantha jerked back, breathless. The walls around her seemed to close in. The house was alive. It had never stopped breathing, never stopped waiting. It didn't just consume. It became. She turned, her eyes wide in horror. Something was moving in the hallway, just beyond her reach. The shadows shifted. The whispers grew louder. Asterisk, we are the story, and you are the next chapter. Asterisk. The floor beneath her buckled. Samantha fell forward, her body suddenly weightless, as if the house itself was pulling her down, down into the deep, into the dark. She tried to scream, but her voice was stolen before it left her lips. The house had claimed another one. The walls pulsed. The shadows grew thicker, darker. And then, quiet. The house stood still, silent once again, patient, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too far, the next to cross the threshold, the next to be swallowed whole. And somewhere deep inside the house, a mirror shimmered, reflecting the endless darkness and the faces of those who had come before. The house was silent, but it was never truly still. Inside, deep in its heart, the air was thick with whispers, soft, insistent, always just out of reach. They echoed through the empty rooms. Asterisk, another one is coming. Asterisk. The walls trembled, not with fear but with hunger. The house didn't sleep. It waited. It waited for those brave enough, foolish enough, to step across the threshold. And they came, one by one, the curious, the lost, the seekers of truth. And they never left. Samantha had vanished, absorbed into the shadows, her fate sealed in a place where time no longer made sense. But her story, her presence, it lingered in the air. A cold draft, a whispered name. Her footsteps could still be heard echoing in the halls. Someone else would hear them next. The house would make sure of it. Another knock. This time it was a man. David. He had heard the rumors, the strange stories circulating about the old estate at the edge of town. It was abandoned, they said, untouched for decades. A place of dark history. A place where things went missing. He never believed in ghost stories. Not really. Until now. He stood at the door, his hand hovering over the brass handle. It felt warm, too warm. The house seemed to breathe around him. And for a moment, just a split second, David considered leaving. But curiosity tugged at him. He couldn't resist. Not after everything he'd heard. He pushed the door open, stepping inside. The air was thick and musty, a scent of decay mixed with something foul, almost metallic. The house seemed to sigh as it welcomed him. The door closed behind him with a soft thunk, and that was when he heard it. A voice. Soft. Faint. Asterisk, we've been waiting. Asterisk. David froze. His hand instinctively reached for his phone. Flicking on the flashlight, the beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and shattered furniture. The hallway stretched on ahead, long and endless. A single flickering light at the far end. He wasn't sure why he kept going, but he did. Step after step, his feet carried him down the narrow, suffocating corridor. The whispers grew louder, closer. The walls seemed to press in around him, tightening like the grip of an unseen hand. "You shouldn't be here," a voice hissed. David spun around, his breath caught in his throat. There was nothing there, just the empty air. But then, a shape emerged from the shadows ahead. A figure, tall, thin, a face, but not a face, just a hollow void, empty eyes, staring straight at him. David's pulse hammered in his chest. He took a step back. Run. But his body wouldn't obey. It was like his legs were stuck in place, his feet glued to the floor. The figure reached out. Long, bony fingers, pale as bone, slowly extended toward him. Asterisk, you can't leave. None of us can. Asterisk, the house had a way of claiming its own. And once it took you, there was no going back. David tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed whole by the oppressive silence. The walls groaned. The shadows stretched longer. The figure was closer now, inches away. And then, a cold, wet hand closed around his wrist. His heart stopped. He tried to pull away, but the grip was unyielding. It was as if the house itself was pulling him in, dragging him toward the darkness. Asterisk, join us. Asterisk. The words were almost comforting, like a lullaby. The walls closed in, the light flickering and sputtering out. In the darkness, David's mind screamed, but the house didn't care. It was patient. It always was. And somewhere, deep within its heart, the house whispered once more. Asterisk, another one has arrived. Asterisk. And so the cycle continued. The house never let go. It never stopped waiting. The house was an endless, living thing. It breathed with every passing moment, its pulse quickening as each new soul wandered into its grasp. David was just another name in its long, forgotten history, another lost spirit to wander its endless halls. But even though the house was old, and the darkness inside it deep, there were moments when the house hungered, when it craved new stories, new souls to twist and trap within its walls. It had been waiting for years, decades. Now it was getting what it wanted. David's screams echoed through the empty rooms, a soft, mournful sound that was quickly absorbed by the thick, suffocating air. But there was no one left to hear them, no one left to care. His body was pulled deeper into the shadows, drawn toward the heart of the house, toward the darkness that lived there. The walls around him were closing in, the air thick and oppressive. The house was alive now, hungry. David's feet left the ground as if gravity no longer applied to him. He felt weightless, helpless, and in the stillness, as the shadows closed around him, he realized something that made his blood run cold. There was no escape. The house didn't just trap you. It consumed you, your soul, your essence. And when it was done, when it had drained you of all that made you human, you became the house. He saw it then. The walls weren't just walls. The floor wasn't just a floor. They were all part of it. The house was a collection of twisted souls, bound together by the same unholy force. And as David's vision blurred and the shadows wrapped tighter around him, he felt himself slipping away. His thoughts became fragmented, broken, and then there was nothing. The house stood still once more, silent, but it knew. It knew it had claimed another one, another soul lost in its labyrinth of darkness, another chapter added to its ever-growing story. The front door, now closed, remained still. It waited, and somewhere, deep within the house, a soft voice echoed through the halls. Asterisk, there's always room for more. Asterisk, the house was alive. It was never truly empty. It never stopped waiting for the next one, the next curious soul to come, the next victim, the next chapter. The house shifted. as if it had just taken a deep, satisfied breath. The walls creaked with a familiar sense of anticipation. The floorboards whispered in the dark. The house never forgot a soul it claimed, but it always hungered for more. David's name, already fading, was added to its growing list of forgotten visitors. A new chapter had been written, but the book was far from finished. Outside, the moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long shadows across the empty streets. The world outside was calm, unaware, but inside the house, time had no meaning, and the door was still open. Miles away, Rachel stood at the edge of the forest, staring at the silhouette of the house in the distance. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The abandoned estate on the outskirts of town was a thing of legend, a place that called to those who were searching for answers, searching for meaning, for adventure. Rachel wasn't searching for anything, but she was drawn to the house, like a moth to a flame. She couldn't explain it, even to herself. Something about it called to her. Something invited her inside. She stood at the gate now, feeling the weight of its rusted bars beneath her fingers as she pushed them open. It was strange, she thought. There should have been some instinct telling her to turn back. Some warning, some voice inside her mind, urging her to go the other way. But she felt nothing. Just the chill of the night air and the overwhelming urge to step inside. Her heart beat faster. Just a quick look, she told herself. Just a glimpse inside. It would be quick. Nothing dangerous. Just curiosity. The moment she crossed the threshold, the house seemed to wake up. It was like a predator sensing the approach of its prey. The air grew heavier, thicker. The shadows deepened. Rachel paused in the hallway, her breath catching in her throat. The temperature had dropped. A cold draft ran through her, and she shivered. The floor creaked beneath her feet, the only sound in the thick silence. The door slammed shut behind her, making her jump. She turned to look, but there was no way back. The door was gone. Only darkness remained, pressing in from all sides. Rachel felt the weight of it then, the pressure of the house, the thick, suffocating presence of something alive, something watching her every move. Her skin prickled, goosebumps rising on her arms. She backed up slowly, but the shadows seemed to follow her, moving just out of the reach of her flashlight. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling slightly. There was no answer. Not immediately. But then, from the darkness ahead, a whisper. A voice. Asterisk soft. Lingering asterisk. Asterisk, you shouldn't be here. Asterisk. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze. Her flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The whisper came again, louder this time. Asterisk, leave. Asterisk. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream, to tear through the house and escape. But her feet felt glued to the floor. She couldn't move. The walls seemed to press closer. She could hear it now. The sound of breathing. The house was alive. It was breathing. And it was waiting for her. The darkness ahead seemed to shift, as if it had a shape, a form. Something moved toward her from the depths of the hall. A figure, tall, thin, a pale, lifeless face. And then asterisk, the voice. Asterisk, welcome home. Asterisk. Rachel's heart slammed against her ribcage. Her chest felt tight, constricted. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight. Run. A voice screamed in her mind. But the house wouldn't let her. The shadows closed in, surrounding her, whispering her name. She reached for the door, but it was gone. The hallway was longer now. The space stretched endlessly, and the walls, they were alive. The breath in her chest quickened. Something was waiting for her, just beyond the light. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. "Join us," it whispered. A hand, cold, wet and unyielding, touched her shoulder, and in the darkness, the walls closed in around her, swallowing her whole. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and inside, the house was still, silent, waiting. Another chapter, another soul, and the house, alive with hunger, whispered once more. Asterisk, we are the story. You are the next. Asterisk, and somewhere deep inside, the shadows shifted. A new reflection appeared in the shattered mirror. A face, familiar, twisted. It was Rachel's, but not quite. The house had claimed her, and as the moon hung low in the sky, the door to the house remained wide open, waiting for the next one. The house had claimed Rachel, but it didn't release her. No, not really. It never released anyone. She was part of it now. Another soul swallowed into the labyrinth of shadow and decay. The walls around her seemed to breathe in time with her own heartbeat. The pulse of the house had become her pulse. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not like she had been when she first stepped inside. There was no room for fear here. Fear was nothing compared to the all-consuming emptiness of the house. Rachel stood in the center of a room she didn't recognize, her feet rooted to the ground, her body rigid, her mind clouded. She had lost track of time. Everything felt distant, like she was no longer entirely herself. Her hands trembled, fingers brushing against the walls, which hummed beneath her touch, responding to her. She wasn't alone in this room either. Figures stood in the darkness, their outlines faint, barely there. But their eyes burned through the dark, watching her. They were like her now, asterisk part of its star, trapped, and just like them. She could feel herself becoming something else, something beyond the limits of flesh. The house had remade her. It was as if the very essence of the building, of all that had come before, was being folded into her. Her body, her mind, her soul, they were all melding with the house. A whisper broke through the silence. Low, haunting. Asterisk, do you feel it? Asterisk. The voice was familiar, a part of her, and yet, it wasn't hers. It was the house. It spoke through her now. Asterisk, the walls, they are you. The floors, your skin. The door, your mouth. Asterisk, her body twisted, bones creaking as if reshaping themselves. Her vision blurred, flickering between the darkened hallway and the endless abyss inside her mind. The cold air filled her lungs, heavy, suffocating. But it wasn't air anymore. It was something thicker, heavier, alive. Asterisk, we are the house. And you're part of the story now. Asterisk. Rachel opened her mouth to scream, but the sound never came. The house didn't allow screams. It only allowed silence. And in that silence she became. Her reflection in the cracked, broken mirror seemed to smile back at her. Twisted, empty, hollow. The house had claimed her completely. And somewhere, deep within, it whispered, asterisk, one more chapter. One more soul. Asterisk. And the door, always open, waited for the next. The house, still and silent, stood as it had for centuries. It was a place where time had no meaning, where the living and the dead blurred into one. It was a place that never truly let go. And yet, the world outside continued to turn. Outside the gates, the town moved on. Life went on. People came and went, oblivious to the horrors hidden just beyond the edge of the forest. But the house, it never stopped. It waited. Somewhere, in the quiet of the night, a soft wind stirred the trees. The moon hung high, casting its silver light over the empty road, over the quiet houses, over the life that continued elsewhere. The house, however, was still. Inside, nothing stirred. Nothing but the whispers that echoed through the hallways, faint but unending, the whispers of those who had once walked these halls. their stories now woven into the very fabric of the place. Their voices, their memories, were now part of it. Their fear, their pain, their final breaths, all of it lived in the walls. It was alive in its own twisted way. And deep inside the house, in the heart of its darkness, the last piece of Rachel's presence lingered. Her face, twisted, unrecognizable, but still there, stared back from the fractured shards of the broken mirror. It was her, and yet it wasn't. She had become the house. Her name, once spoken aloud by the living, had dissolved into the silence, forgotten by the world. But the house had remembered. It always remembered, and it had no intention of ever letting go. The door, now ajar, creaked in the wind, inviting the next soul, the next seeker, the next curious, lost, or brave wanderer who would fall into its grasp. The house was always patient. It was always waiting. And as the night drifted into another quiet morning, the house stood, asterisk forever star. It whispered softly to itself, asterisk, the story never ends, asterisk, and for the house, that was enough.